The bolt-action rifle clicked empty in the Japanese soldier's hands, and in that split second of silence, before he could work another round into the chamber, I squeezed my trigger 8 times. 8 thunderous cracks from my M1 Garand split the jungle air like lightning. They fired once, we fired 8 times. That was the difference between life and death on Guadalcanal. That was the difference between victory and defeat in the green hell of the Solomon Islands. My name is Corporal Jake Morrison, and I'm telling you this story from a foxhole on Henderson Field, where the smell of cordite still hangs in the humid air, and the bodies of Japanese soldiers lie scattered across the jungle floor like broken dolls. It's October 1942, and we've been fighting for this godforsaken strip of land for 2 months now. But today, we showed the Emperor's finest what American steel and American determination could do. The morning started like every other morning in this green nightmare. The air was thick enough to chew, filled with the buzz of mosquitoes and the distant rumble of Japanese artillery. I was cleaning my rifle, my beautiful, deadly M1 Garand, when Sergeant Murphy crawled over to our position. "Morrison," he whispered, his weathered face streaked with sweat and dirt. "We got movement about 200 yards northwest. Looks like the Japs are massing for another push at the airfield." I nodded and checked my rifle one more time. 8 rounds in the clip, 1 in the chamber. 9 chances to send some Japanese souls to their ancestors. The M1 Garand was a thing of beauty, 30 caliber, semi-automatic, and capable of putting down more lead in 30 seconds than a whole squad of Japanese soldiers with their bolt-action Arisakas. "Pass the word," Murphy continued. "We hold this Lene no matter what. If they take Henderson Field, we're all swimming home." The jungle around us was deathly quiet except for the drip of moisture from the canopy above. My squad, 8 Marines armed with M1 Garands, was dug in along a ridge that overlooked a natural clearing. It was perfect killing ground, and we all knew the Japanese would have to cross it if they wanted to reach the airfield. Private Collins, barely 19 years old and fresh from boot camp at Paris Island, was shaking like a leaf in the foxhole next to mine. "Corporal," he whispered, "what if they come in waves? What if there's too many of them?" I looked at the kid and hefted my Garand. "Son, you see this rifle? This right here is 8 dead Japanese soldiers before they can work their bolt actions twice. You remember that, and you'll do just fine." The truth was, I was scared too. We all were. The Japanese had been hitting us with everything they had, artillery, air raids, and banzai charges that came screaming out of the jungle like something from a nightmare. But we had something they didn't. We had the M1 Garand, and in the hands of American Marines, it was the most lethal infantry weapon on Earth. At 0800 hours, the jungle exploded. Japanese mortar rounds began falling like deadly rain, sending geysers of dirt and shrapnel in every direction. I pressed my face into the mud off my foxhole and felt the earth shake with each impact. Then came the sound that made every Marine's blood run cold, the high-pitched scream of a Japanese banzai charge. "Here they come," Murphy shouted over the noise. I raised my head and peered through the jungle gloom. At first I saw nothing but green shadows and dancing leaves. Then the shadows began to move, and I realized they weren't shadows at all. They were Japanese soldiers, dozens of them, charging through the underbrush with their rifles and bayonets gleaming in the filtered sunlight. "Hold your fire," Murphy commanded. "Let them get closer." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the gunfire. The Japanese soldiers were screaming something in their language, probably calling on their emperor or their ancestors. They came running across that clearing like men possessed, their bolt-action Arisaka rifles held at the ready. 50 yards. 40, 30, fire. The ridge erupted in thunder. 8 M1 Garands opened up simultaneously, and the sound was like the gates of hell swinging wide. I squeezed my trigger as fast as I could pull it, and my rifle bucked against my shoulder with each shot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The distinctive ping of the empty clip ejecting rang out like a bell. But here's the thing about the M1 Garand that those Japanese soldiers learned too late, while they were still working the bolts on their single-shot rifles, trying to chamber their second round. We were already slamming fresh 8-round clips into our weapons and firing again. The first wave of Japanese soldiers never knew what hit them. I watched through the smoke as at least 20 enemy troops crumpled to the ground, cut down by the devastating firepower of American semi-automatic rifles. Their bolt-action Arisakas were fine weapons, accurate and reliable, but they were designed for a different kind of war. In the close-quarters jungle fighting of Guadalcanal, rate of fire meant everything. "Reload!" I shouted, though I could barely hear my own voice over the ringing in my ears. I slammed a fresh clip into my Garand and looked out across the clearing. The jungle floor was littered with Japanese bodies, but more were coming. Always more. The second wave hit us 30 seconds later. This time they came from two directions, trying to flank our position. But Murphy had anticipated this. He'd positioned our squad in overlapping fields of fire, and when those Japanese soldiers broke cover, they walked into a meat grinder. Private Collins had stopped shaking. The kid was working his M1 like a veteran, squeezing off measured shots and dropping enemy soldiers with deadly precision. "They keep coming," he shouted. "Let 'em come," I shouted back. "We got plenty of ammunition," and we did. Each Marine carried at least 10 8-round clips for his Garand, giving us over 600 rounds of 30-6 ammunition between the 8 of us. The Japanese, on the other hand, had to make every shot count with their bolt-action rifles. They simply couldn't match our rate of fire. The third wave was the largest. I counted at least 40 Japanese soldiers charging across the clearing, their bayonets fixed and their faces twisted with desperate determination. They'd realized by now that their bolt-action rifles were no match for our semi-automatics, so they were trying to close the distance and finish us with cold steel. They never made it. 8 M1 Garands firing at maximum rate created a wall of lead that nothing could penetrate. I watched Japanese soldiers stumble and fall as our bullets found their marks. Some tried to take cover behind fallen logs or in shell craters, but there was nowhere to hide from the devastating firepower we were laying down. "Target left," Murphy called out. A group of Japanese soldiers was trying to work around our flank, moving through a small ravine about 100 yards away. I swung my rifle toward the target and began firing. The M1 Garand was incredibly accurate, even at range. I could see my bullets kicking up dirt around the enemy soldiers, and then I saw one of them spin and fall as my shot found its mark. The battle lasted 20 minutes, but it felt like 20 hours. By the time the smoke cleared, the jungle in front of our position looked like a slaughterhouse. Bodies in Japanese uniforms lay scattered across the clearing, some in neat rows where our concentrated fire had cut them down, others crumpled behind whatever cover they'd tried to find. I counted 63 enemy dead, and that was just what I could see from my position. Our squad of 8 Marines had broken a full company of Japanese infantry, and we'd done it with nothing but M1 Garands and American fighting spirit. "Cease fire," Murphy called out. "Check your ammo." I looked down at my rifle. The barrel was hot enough to fry an egg, and I'd gone through 6 8-round clips. 48 rounds fired in 20 minutes. Private Collins had emptied 7 clips. The other Marines in our squad had similar counts. In 20 minutes of fighting, 8 American Marines had fired over 400 rounds of accurate, semi-automatic fire. The Japanese, with their bolt-action rifles, could never have matched that volume of fire. They might have been brave, and they were, charging across the clearing in the face of overwhelming firepower. But bravery alone couldn't overcome the technological advantage of the M1 Garand. "Morrison," Murphy called out, "take Collins and sweep the perimeter. Make sure there are no wounded Japs playing dead." I nodded and climbed out of my foxhole, my Garand ready. Collins followed me, his face pale but determined. We moved carefully through the jungle, checking each body to make sure the enemy was truly dead. What I saw in that clearing still haunts my dreams. Japanese soldiers cut down in their prime, many of them no older than Collins. They died bravely, charging into the teeth of superior firepower, but they died nonetheless. The M1 Garand had given us an overwhelming advantage, and we'd used it to devastating effect. "Corporal," Collins whispered as we stepped over a young Japanese soldier who couldn't have been more than 18. "Look at his rifle." I looked down at the Arisaka bolt-action rifle clutched in the dead soldier's hands. It was a fine weapon, well-made and accurate. But it was a single-shot rifle in a war that demanded rapid fire. While that Japanese boy was working his bolt to chamber his second round, one of us had put 8 rounds downrange. "That's war, son," I told Collins. "We didn't make the rules. We just played by them better than the other guy." We finished our sweep and returned to our positions. Murphy was already calling in a report to battalion headquarters, describing the engagement and requesting ammunition resupply. Word came back that Japanese forces were massing for another attack on Henderson Field, this time in greater numbers. "How many more clips you got, Morrison?" Murphy asked. I checked my ammunition pouches. 4 clips, Sarge, 32 rounds. "Same here," said Collins. Murphy nodded grimly. "Battalion sending up a resupply detail. Should be here in an hour. Think you can make 32 rounds last until then?" I patted my M1 Garand affectionately. "With this rifle, Sarge, 32 rounds might as well be 100. These Japs are about to learn that lesson all over again." The Japanese attacked twice more that day. Each time, our M1 Garands cut them down like wheat before a scythe. The semi-automatic firepower advantage was so overwhelming that enemy commanders began to change their tactics, sending smaller groups to try to infiltrate our lines rather than mounting the massive banzai charges that had worked so well against bolt-action rifles in China. But it didn't matter. Whether they came in waves or in small groups, the result was the same. The M1 Garand gave us a rate of fire that the Japanese simply couldn't match. While they were working their bolt actions, we were laying down devastating fields of semi-automatic fire. By the end of that bloody day, our squad of 8 Marines had accounted for over 120 confirmed enemy dead. We'd used up our entire ammunition supply, 80 clips of 8 rounds each, but we'd held our position and protected Henderson Field. As night fell over Guadalcanal, I sat in my foxhole cleaning my M1 Garand. The rifle had performed flawlessly throughout the day, never jamming or misfiring despite the heat and humidity of the jungle. It was a testament to American engineering and manufacturing, a weapon that gave every American infantryman the firepower of an anti-enemy squad. "Corporal," Collins said softly, "what do you think those Japanese soldiers were thinking when they heard us firing so fast?" I thought about that for a moment. "I think they were stunned, son. They came expecting to fight Americans armed with bolt-action rifles like they'd faced in China. Instead, they ran into semi-automatic firepower that they couldn't match or understand. The truth was, the M1 Garand had revolutionized infantry combat. While other armies were still equipping their soldiers with bolt-action rifles that fired one shot at a time, America had given every infantryman a semi-automatic weapon capable of firing as fast as he could pull the trigger. It was a force multiplier that turned every American soldier into a squad-level weapons system. Over the following weeks, word of the American rifle's devastating effectiveness spread through the Japanese ranks. Prisoners we captured told us about the fear that the rapid-fire rifle inspired in enemy troops. They'd expected to fight Americans armed with the same bolt-action weapons that every other army carried. Instead, they faced a technological advantage that completely changed the nature of infantry combat. The Japanese called it the American rapid-fire rifle, and they learned to fear the distinctive sound it made. The sharp crack of the 30-6 cartridge was different from their own rifles, and when they heard multiple M1 Garands firing in sequence, they knew they were facing firepower that their bolt-action Arisakas simply couldn't match. But it wasn't just the rate of fire that made the M1 Garand so effective. The rifle was incredibly accurate, capable of hitting targets at ranges that would challenge any bolt-action weapon. 30-6 cartridge pack, tremendous stopping power, and the 8-round-and-block clip allowed for sustained fire without the constant reloading that plagued single-shot rifles. During my time on Guadalcanal, I saw Japanese soldiers attempt to charge American positions only to be cut down by the devastating firepower of the M1 Garand. Time and again, enemy forces that might have overrun positions defended by bolt-action rifles were stopped cold by the semi-automatic fire of American Marines and soldiers. The psychological effect was just as important as the tactical advantage. Japanese soldiers who had been conditioned to expect a certain rhythm of battle, fire, work the bolt, fire again, suddenly found themselves facing Americans who could fire 8 aimed shots in the time it took to cycle a bolt-action rifle twice. The shock of that overwhelming firepower broke the morale of many enemy units before they could even close to bayonet range. I remember one particular engagement near the Mataniko River where a company of Japanese infantry attempted a night attack on our positions. They came in the traditional manner, with fixed bayonets and blood-curdling screams, expecting to overwhelm us in close combat where their superior numbers would tell. They never got within 50 yards of our lines. The M1 Garands of my battalion opened up in a thunderous crescendo that lit up the jungle like the 4th of July. Semi-automatic fire poured into the attacking Japanese forces, and the sound was like a continuous roll of thunder. Enemy soldiers fell by the dozen, cut down by the devastating rate of fire that they simply couldn't match with their bolt-action rifles. Within minutes, the attack had collapsed. The few Japanese soldiers who survived retreated back into the jungle, leaving over 200 dead behind them. Our battalion had suffered exactly 3 casualties, all minor wounds from enemy grenades thrown in desperation as the attack fell apart. That night, as I sat cleaning my M1 Garand once again, I realized that I was holding more than just a rifle. I was holding the key to American victory in the Pacific. The technological advantage that the Garand gave us wasn't just about firepower. It was about confidence. Every American infantryman knew that he could outshoot any enemy soldier, and that knowledge made us fight harder and more aggressively. The Japanese, on the other hand, began to lose confidence in their ability to overrun American positions through sheer numbers and fighting spirit. They'd built their entire military doctrine around the idea that superior morale and willingness to die could overcome material disadvantages. But when your enemy can fire 8 times for every shot you take, morale alone isn't enough. As the Guadalcanal campaign wore on, I watched the Japanese change their tactics in response to the devastating effectiveness of the M1 Garand. They stopped launching the massive banzai charges that had been so successful in China and began relying more on artillery, air attacks, and infiltration tactics. But even these new approaches couldn't overcome the fundamental firepower advantage that the Garand gave to American forces. By November 1942, it was clear that the Japanese had lost the initiative on Guadalcanal. Their attempts to retake Henderson Field had been shattered by the superior firepower of American forces, and their inability to match the rate of fire of the M1 Garand had cost them thousands of casualties. Enemy units that might have been able to overrun positions defended by bolt-action rifles were consistently defeated by the semi-automatic fire of American Marines and soldiers. The final Japanese evacuation from Guadalcanal in February 1943 marked the end of their offensive capability in the Solomon Islands. They'd lost over 25,000 men in the campaign, many of them cut down by the devastating firepower off the M1 Garand. American casualties, while significant, were far lower, a testament to the technological advantage that the semi-automatic rifle provided. As I prepared to leave Guadalcanal with my battalion, I took one last look at that jungle clearing where we'd first demonstrated the killing power of the M1 Garand. The bodies had long since been buried, but I could still see the scene in my mind's eye, Japanese soldiers charging bravely across open ground, only to be cut down by the rapid fire of American semi-automatic rifles. They fired once. We fired 8 times. That simple equation had changed the course of the war in the Pacific. The M1 Garand wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of American industrial might and technological superiority. While other nations were still equipping their soldiers with designs that dated back to the First World War, America had leaped ahead with a rifle that wouldn't look out of place on a modern battlefield. The Garand represented everything that made America great: innovation, manufacturing excellence, and the determination to give our fighting men the best equipment possible. During my time in the Pacific, I carried that M1 Garand through campaigns on Bougainville, Saipan, and Iwo Jima. In every battle, the rifle performed flawlessly, giving me and my fellow Marines the firepower advantage we needed to defeat determined Japanese resistance. Enemy soldiers learned to fear the distinctive sound of the Garand's semi-automatic fire, and many battles were won before they truly began because the Japanese simply couldn't match our rate of fire. The impact of the M1 Garand on infantry combat cannot be overstated. It transformed every American soldier into a one-man squad, capable of laying down devastating firepower that could stop enemy attacks cold. The psychological effect on Japanese forces was profound. They'd been conditioned to expect a certain rhythm of battle, and the rapid fire of the Garand shattered their tactical assumptions and broke their morale. But perhaps most importantly, the M1 Garand gave American forces the confidence they needed to take the offensive in the Pacific. Knowing that we could outshoot any enemy soldier made us more aggressive and more willing to assault heavily defended positions. The technological advantage of the semi-automatic rifle translated into tactical superiority on every battlefield. As I sit here now, many years after the war, I still have my M1 Garand hanging on the wall of my study. It's the same rifle I carried through 4 campaigns in the Pacific, the same rifle that saved my life more times than I can count. When I look at it, I remember that clearing on Guadalcanal where 8 American Marines with semi-automatic rifles broke the back of a Japanese company armed with bolt-action weapons. The young men who died in that jungle clearing, both American and Japanese, deserved better than the war that claimed them. But they were soldiers, and they did their duty as they saw it. The difference was that American soldiers were armed with a rifle that gave them every possible advantage, while Japanese soldiers were equipped with weapons that belonged to an earlier era of warfare. The M1 Garand wasn't just a rifle, it was the edge that helped America win the war in the Pacific. It was 8 shots to their 1, semi-automatic fire to their bolt action, and American innovation triumphing over traditional military thinking. In the hands of American Marines and soldiers, the Garand became the most feared infantry weapon in the Pacific theater, and Japanese forces never found an adequate answer to its devastating firepower. They fired once, we fired 8 times. That was the difference between victory and defeat, between coming home and dying in a foreign jungle. That was the power of American steel in the hands of American heroes, and it helped turn the tide of the greatest war in human history. The M1 Garand may have been just a rifle, but in the Pacific theater of World War II, it was the rifle that changed everything. And I was proud to carry one into battle for my country and my fellow Marines.